Welcome to The Explainer, where we break down big topics.
So, today, we're diving into a time when artists did just that. We're talking about the early 20th century, when a handful of really revolutionary movements just tore up the rulebook. Why? Well, they were responding to a world that felt like it had been turned completely upside down.
Okay, so to really get why art changed so radically, we first have to understand the profound crisis that completely shattered early 20th century Europe. You see, traditional art, the stuff focused on beautiful, realistic paintings, it just felt irrelevant. It couldn't capture the feeling of the times anymore.
And believe me, this period was a relentless storm of change. I mean, look at this timeline. In just a few short decades, Europe was rocked by the unbelievable devastation of World War I. And at the exact same time, you have this surge of revolutionary artistic ideas popping up that were going to reshape everything.
But you know, this wasn't just a political crisis. It was deeply psychological. Think about it. People felt totally lost. They were alienated by all these new machines, by the anonymity of crowded cities. They were haunted, literally haunted, by the trauma of war. And on top of all that, you have these unsettling new theories from guys like Sigmund Freud, who started suggesting our minds are actually driven by these hidden, unconscious forces. Talk about a lot to deal with.
So what does all this mean for art? Well, it meant that for a lot of artists, the old way of doing things just felt broken. It was too polite, too ordered, too focused on the outside world. To even begin to capture this new, fractured inner reality, they needed a whole new artistic language. And that need is exactly what gave birth to the three powerful movements we're going to dive into right now.
All right, the first response was to turn inward. Artists started to completely abandon the mission of painting what the world looked like on the outside. Instead, they chose to paint raw, unfiltered emotion. And just like that, Expressionism was born.
So, Expressionism wasn't about painting what you see. It was all about painting what you feel. The whole point was to reveal some kind of inner truth, even if that truth was distorted or unsettling or, well, even ugly. You can think of it like a direct pipeline from the artist's soul straight onto the canvas.
In this quote from Edward Munch, whose work, by the way, was a huge inspiration for the movement, it just captures the idea perfectly. He said he felt an infinite scream passing through nature. So for him, the art wasn't about painting a pretty sunset. Nope. It was about painting that infinite scream, that internal anguish that he was projecting out onto the world.
Now, what's really interesting is that German Expressionism kind of split into two main groups. On one side, you had Die Brücke, which means the bridge. These artists use these really jarring, almost acidic colors and rough brushwork to show the raw anxiety of modern city life. And then on the other side, you had Der Blaue Reiter, the Blue Rider. They were doing something different. They were looking for a spiritual escape, using symbolic colors and more abstract forms, trying to find a little bit of harmony in all that chaos.
Okay, so if Expressionism was about putting emotion over logic, our next movement basically declared that in a world that's gone completely mad, the only rational response is to abandon logic altogether. Welcome to the world of Dada.
Dada was born right in the middle of the carnage of World War I. And the Dadaists, they believed that the logic, the reason, the whole culture that led to such senseless destruction was totally bankrupt. So what did they do? Their art became a direct attack on those very concepts. It really wasn't a style. It was an attitude of pure, unadulterated protest. And their most radical weapon? It was something they called the ready-made. This one concept, it just perfectly captured their whole philosophy of anti-art.
I mean, just think about it. Marcel Duchamp takes a common urinal, turns it on its side, signs it Art Mud, and calls it Fountain. Without one move, he made an absolutely shocking argument that the idea behind the art was way more important than the physical object or even the skill it took to make it. Art, he was saying, could just be an act of choice, of thought.
And to wage this war on reason, they built this whole arsenal of chaotic techniques. They used photomontage, basically cutting and pasting photos, to make savage critiques of politics. They made art by literally just letting torn paper fall by chance. They'd perform sound poems made of nothing but meaningless gibberish. Why? It was all to mirror the complete and utter absurdity of the world around them.
All right, let's move on to our final movement. Now this one, it builds on Dada's rebellion for sure, but it channels all that irrational energy toward a totally different goal. exploring the deep, dark depths of the subconscious mind.
The Surrealists were led by a guy named André Breton, and he'd actually worked with soldiers suffering from psychological trauma during the war. So this really fueled their fascination with Freud's theories of the unconscious. They became convinced that a truer, more authentic reality, what they called a surreality, existed in our hidden desires, our fears, our dreams, and their whole mission was to unlock it.
So the big question was, how do you actually get past the rational mind to access all that stuff? Well, they developed some very specific techniques. There was automatism, which is basically drawing or writing without any conscious control. They created these bizarre, uncanny juxtapositions, like a melting clock in a desert, specifically to disrupt logic. And of course, most famously, they painted dream imagery, making the totally impossible look completely photographically real.
And all this led to two pretty distinct styles. On one hand, you had the hyper-realistic dreamscapes from artists like Salvador Dali. He used these super meticulous, traditional painting techniques to make his bizarre visions feel disturbingly believable. And then on the other hand, you had the more abstract, kind of biomorphic style of artists like Jean Miro. He used automatism to create these floating, organic shapes that just hint at a hidden inner world of life forms.
Now, it's really important to note that while the movement was often dominated by men, some absolutely brilliant female artists like Leonora Carrington and Remedios Varo took Surrealism's tools and used them to chart their own inner territory. They created these incredibly rich, mystical worlds that explored themes of alchemy, transformation, and the complexities of female identity.
So, after all that, why does any of this matter today?
Well, it's because these movements didn't just create a few new styles of art. No, they completely tore up the rulebook. They totally redefined what art could even be. Think about it. They gave art entirely new jobs to do. Suddenly, art could be a tool to explore our own inner worlds. It could be a weapon for social and political protest. And it could be a philosophical question that challenged the very nature of reality and what art even is. So together, these three movements, they unleashed a creative rebellion whose aftershocks we are still feeling today. I mean, by challenging that boundary between art and life and by prioritizing the idea over the object, they basically paved the way for so many major art forms of the 20th and 21st centuries. We're talking pop art, conceptual art, the list goes on.
And ultimately, their legacy proves something really powerful. It proves that in a world that feels broken or just plain absurd, sometimes the most powerful thing an artist, or really any of us, can do is to reject the status quo, embrace the irrational, and have the courage to imagine a completely new reality.